Welcome to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. What does it really take to lead when the pressure is relentless? The stakes are global and the room wasn't built for you in the first place. Today, I'm joined by Claire Williams, former deputy team principal of Williams Racing, one of the most iconic teams in Formula One. Claire's also one of the only two women to have ever managed teams in Formula One and the youngest ever deputy team principal in motorsports. Now, this isn't just a conversation about racing. It's about the moments no one sees, the doubt behind closed doors, the weight of leadership at its lowest point, and the sacrifices that don't make headlines. We'll talk about what it means to be underestimated and still rise, whether women are still forced to prove themselves more, and how to push back without apology. And for any woman who feels stuck right now, we're getting practical. How to build confidence before you feel ready, make decisions in uncertainty, and take that first uncomfortable step forward. This is a conversation about pressure, power, and becoming the leader you didn't know you could be. She's a mother, a wife, public speaker, vice president of the Spinal Injuries Association, officer of the Order of the British Empire, and the former leader of Williams' F1 team. Claire Williams, welcome to Empowered.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you on here. So when you became team leader of Williams, was there a moment behind closed doors there where you thought, I don't know if I can do this? And what pulled you through?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I first took over Williams, it was in quite challenging circumstances, shall we say. There was a bit of power struggle going on behind the scenes between a few of us as to who was actually going to take over and step into those shoes. But I was asked. I have to say and point out, I was never asked by my dad. It was by the board. There was no predetermined or destined that I was ever going to one day take over his racing team. But my mother had been sick for the 3 years prior to me taking over, and she actually passed away at the very start of the 2013 season, which was when I had been asked to take over Williams. And she unfortunately passed away 2 weeks before I was due to start, and there was a lot of difficulty surrounding that. So to be asked to step in and take over your family's racing team when your mother has just passed away, who was probably one of the team's greatest fans, and Williams probably would not be here, would not have even started really if it hadn't been for my mother, because she bankrolled the team in the beginning because my father had no money. And there was obviously there were moments at that point where I thought, can I do this? Am I in the right place to do this? So I'm grieving my mother. But I had to step in, and I knew that my mother would have wanted me to have taken on the challenge. We had discussed it prior to her passing. And, she said, you must make time for play. I remember her distinctly saying that to me, don't get all caught up in Formula One. Unfortunately, that's not what exactly happened. That was probably the first of many moments when I thought, can I do this? Running a Formula One team is incredibly challenging, is an incredibly pressured environment, incredibly complex. I was, as you said in your introduction, I was very young. I was 36 when I took over, and I was one of only two women that were running a Formula One team in a very challenging environment in the sport at the time.
So Formula One is such a high stakes industry. What did pressure feel like at your lowest point, and how did you carry it without letting it define who you were?
I have an interesting relationship, I think, with pressure. Formula One, every day you are facing pressured circumstances, whether that be decisions under pressure on the pit wall or back at headquarters. You are faced with it each and every minute, pretty much of every day in Formula One. It doesn't really go away. There's not a lot of respite, and contradictory to what most people think. Even in the winter, it actually ramps up the work that you need to do, and therefore the pressure that is placed upon you. But I never really felt that pressure, maybe because you become almost anesthetized to it. You're so used to it. You just have to get on with it. My dad taught me one of the greatest lessons. That's you've just got to roll your sleeves up, put in the hard work and almost forget about that pressure. Pressure can be a very debilitating emotion. And if you let it control you, let it control your emotions, you're in real trouble.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with more. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's topic is Formula One, a masterclass in leadership. So, Claire, who were you before Formula One, and how did leadership change that person?
So, for those people that are watching, listening, they might not know my background, but my father started the Williams F1 team, and I lived in his shadow. He was an incredibly successful team principal. He won 16 world championships throughout my whole childhood. And even into my 20s, going into my early 30s, I was Frank Williams's daughter. When I was introduced to people, invariably that was how I was introduced. That's Frank Williams's daughter. Or people would point at me, that's Frank Williams's daughter. That really defined me growing up. And it was actually Formula One, and which is a weird contradiction maybe, but it was actually Formula One in a leadership role that I stepped into in 2013 that changed that. That actually allowed me to forge my own character, my own name. I suddenly became Claire Williams, deputy team principal. I was no longer Frank Williams, and I came out of that shadow, and I was almost enabled to form my own personality and define who I was out of the shadow of a famous and very successful parent.
And people don't see that. People just make assumptions. What did you have to sacrifice that people don't often see? And that's part of it.
Family. I think when you are working in a world like Formula One, you have to invariably make sacrifices, not least because you're not at home a whole lot. And I didn't consciously do it, but Formula One was my whole life growing up, and it was certainly my whole life up to probably meeting my husband when I was, oh God, I can't even remember now, mid-30s, something like that. But it was family that I really had to sacrifice. I was very lucky. I got to see my dad every day, obviously, because he was still in the office and at the track. But getting married at the same time, all my friends did. That did not happen for me. I got married when I was 41, and I didn't have my first child until I was 41 as well. And I'd always wanted to. So I will, I'm very open about the fact that I probably sacrificed having a second child, for my other love, for my other baby. And that was my racing team.
And that's a huge sacrifice to take. A lot of people don't even think about something like that. I want to talk about your team principal role. When did you feel most alone in your team principal role? And what did it teach you about yourself?
It's interesting. I rarely felt alone. Formula One is an incredible environment, where there is, despite enormous competition on the racetrack and intra-team or inter-team, within your team, you're never alone. There is the most extraordinary camaraderie. You are living with these people day in, day out, traveling with them, racing with them, and they become your world. And in the good times, we're all there, we're celebrating. At the moments when you'd expect, I think, perhaps to feel alone, the times when you're not winning, you're not going to the podium, when you've really got to dig deep, in order to drive performance. Those were the moments where I never really felt alone, because firstly, I had great people around me, but I had my whole team around me. And they always used to say, "We've got your back." And we always had each other's backs. And that was really important. And I think we had quite a unique culture at Williams that bred that kind of camaraderie where we all looked out for each other. But I suppose that's not to say everything was always like that. There were moments when, despite my team being there for me, they couldn't be there, when I had to come to sell the team. When in 2020, that was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. And despite them being there, that was a very lonely place to be. No one could feel the pain, I suppose, that I was feeling having to sell my father's and my family's beloved racing team.
Do you feel that when you had to sell the team, you were almost selling a part of your identity as well?
Yes, and I was very aware of that, and I was very conscious that subsequent to the sale there would be consequences for me personally. I knew that that was going to be coming. I was almost looking forward to it. I was looking forward to a world outside what is a very bubbled world living in Formula One. And I didn't just have a career in it, I grew up in it. My whole life had been defined by it. I knew stepping out of that world was going to be a challenge, and it was probably more of a challenge. And a lot of sports people or people that work in sport will feel those emotions very keenly, because sport is a intricate part of your world, and when it's no longer there, it does leave an enormous hole that you have to find a way to fill.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with more Claire Williams. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's topic is Formula One, a masterclass in leadership. Claire, off camera, you and I were talking about this. I was mentioning that I was on the board of the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame, and I went around the track with James Hinchcliffe in his road Subaru 3 times. I didn't feel like myself when I got out of his car. It was almost like an out-of-body experience and trying to get my sea legs back on the ground. Can you just explain? I know you're not a race car driver, but can you just explain to people what racing does to you? Because I'm sure that you've been in the race car with a lot of those race car drivers.
Yeah, firstly, you're a very lucky lady. You got a passenger ride in any kind of race car. I mean, that's just, if I could do that every day of my life, I'd be happy.
Agreed.
It's a phenomenal experience, and I think it's one of the things that shocks people the most when they do, they go and do a track day in a single seater car in particular, or they're lucky enough to have a passenger ride. The speed, I think, yes, there is the expectation that you're going to be hurtling around a racetrack at God knows what speed. It's actually the braking that can be so surprising to people, and I think people underestimate, or they don't even think about before getting into a car. The braking of these cars, and particularly Formula One cars, is something it's very difficult to even explain. You have to experience it. But when you do sit in these cars, when you are lucky enough to go around a track in them, the adrenaline that you get, I mean, it is like the greatest roller coaster thrill ride. I mean, I've been lucky enough to be in many, but the best one I've ever been is a rally car. I went to the Dirtfish Rally School in Washington State last year, and I was lucky enough to go in a rally car, and I haven't done that before, and that is a whole nother experience. But what I always find extraordinary is the driving capability of these drivers, and I've talked to them about it, as you can imagine, many times. Their cognizant ability to not just focus on what's coming in the here and now, but what is coming down the road in 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters. They're processing that ahead of anything that we would perhaps do in a road car, and it's a very different experience when you're sat next to a race car driver, being in a road car or a race car. That their brains work on completely different levels.
And it is a thrilling ride for sure. I
It is.
I'd like to move on to leadership. I want to talk to you about, or ask you, what's a rule in leadership that you think is just outdated or broken?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily outdated or broken, but my biggest rule that I ever had was to treat people as you would want to be treated. That kindness and manners are as important in the workplace as they are in the real world when you're out and about. And you should treat people like you would treat your family. I think sometimes leaders step into a place where they think, I'm the boss, I'm the leader, I can treat people how I want, or, I need to be curt and I need to be brusque. And I think that we forget that we're still human. We're still the same as everybody else. Just because we've been given the top job, it doesn't mean that we need to forget our pleases, our thank yous, our courtesy, and to make sure that you still know and understand what you're asking your people to do. Never ask somebody to do something you wouldn't do yourself. That was kind of my motto. And make sure you know who your people are and what they need from you in order to thrive. And I think what we all must remember as a leader. You're there, your responsibility is to ensure and empower people to thrive in your organization.
And so, what's something about leadership that people glamorize, but is actually incredibly hard?
Probably most of it.
Yeah.
I think, most people aspire to be a leader, and then when you finally get to that position, you're like, oh my gosh, it was much nicer being the press officer. In my case, I always think, oh, I just wish I could go back to being the press officer. It was a lot easier. There's an awful lot. You have an awful lot of power as a leader, yes, and you have to use it in the right way. But it is the pressure. It's the day to day. You are responsible for every single person in your organization. Effectively, you are responsible for their mortgages, their children's school fees, their ability to put food on the table. That is not glamorous. That comes with it a level of responsibility nobody else in the organization has to undertake. Um, Separately, I suppose, and maybe particular in Formula One, is everyone looks at Formula One as a sport that's incredibly glamorous. And we've just had the Monaco Grand Prix, but it is hard work. It is not glamorous, and the travel, I think. And normally, when you are a leader, you're invariably traveling an awful lot with your role. And as much as you might travel business, or you get to go into lounges, it's hard. The travel element of being a leader, I think, can be really difficult.
Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Empowered. I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Today's topic is Formula One, a masterclass in leadership, and I'm joined by Claire Williams, former leader of Williams' Formula One team. Okay, Claire, if a woman feels stuck right in her career right now, what's the first uncomfortable step that she should take this week?
I think talking to your boss is the first thing that you need to do. Whatever challenges you're facing, that's what your boss is there for. And you should be met with a level of courtesy and respect for your concerns, and respect for the courage that it does take to have that kind of conversation with your boss. I think if you are met with a brick wall, and an unresponsive situation, I think you have to seriously question whether that is the right environment for you. We all deserve to be in jobs that we enjoy. I was incredibly lucky in my job. I know and understand how lucky I was to work in the world that I did. But I do know during that time, during the course of progression to get to where I got to, I had uncomfortable conversations with my boss. I had many a conversation where I'm not happy, I don't feel challenged enough. And it does take courage to have those conversations, but you have to step up and be brave and have them, because this is your life, it's your career, and therefore it's your responsibility to take ownership and charge of that, and to make sure you forge the path that you want. Don't be the passenger on your career journey. Take ownership of it. Have those difficult conversations. And if you don't get the answers that you want, then perhaps it's time to be brave and look somewhere else.
So, back to women again. How could women build confidence when they don't yet have the experience to back it up? And I get this question all the time from new graduates from universities.
I think I've always been of the opinion that educating yourself, continually educating yourself, is one of the best ways to improve yourself. And yes, you've got to be there in the job, and you've got to get that experience, but there's so many things that you can do around the actual work that you're employed to do in order to boost your confidence. There were so many times in my career, even in my leadership career, where I had to step into a room and I was the youngest, I was the least experienced. I just had to get on with it. That sometimes there is no magic theory for how this works. It's you've just got to go through the motions. A number of times I would be in a team principal meetings with the likes of Bernie Ecclestone and the great and the good TPs of this sport, Ron Dennis, Fabio Briatore, feeling so intimidated, not feeling like I belonged, not feeling like I knew enough the subject matter that we were discussing that day. You've got to sit there, you've got to hold your head up high, and you've got to believe in yourself. If you don't have that self-confidence, then that is going to project into the room. And you've got to do whatever you've got to do in order to walk in there with that level of confidence. You've got to be prepared, and then you've got to own your space. I think that is so important. That expression, fake it till you make it, is kind of how I operated, I suppose, in those first, few months of my career. I didn't feel like I belonged, but I had been given that job for a reason by people that thought that I could do that job. And you've got to reflect on those elements, I suppose, if you're not feeling confident. Somebody gave you that job because they believed in you. So actually give you some self-confidence, and then step in, lean in, and take the space because you belong there just as much as anyone else does.
That's important to understand and to know. And thank you for sharing that. Um, Also, what's one daily habit that helped you stay mentally strong under pressure? Because we all have little quirky things that we do.
Well, I had a few. Sleep was really important to me, and I think we can underestimate the power of it. If you don't get enough sleep, you aren't going to be able to function, whether that be mentally or physically, the next day. And I was very lucky, despite a lot of the trauma and turmoil that I went through in Formula One. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I would be out. And I always knew how powerful that was for me. But I think rest is really important as well. Stepping away, taking some downtime, watching some Netflix, whatever you love to watch or whatever you love to do. Take time, carve time out to do that. And then running for me was one absolute priority in my toolkit that kept me sane throughout my time running Williams. I needed to run away from my problems, to run away from the noise that was in my head, to run away sometimes from the demands from my team. That was the most powerful for me, probably. Those two, sleep and running. And I think you've got to find out what works for you and then make sure you prioritize them in your career.
Claire Williams, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Elizabeth Naumovski. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.